We are live. Hey, 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 everybody. Laura and I are back for our fortnightly live. I've missed you over the last fortnight.
I know. Sometimes it feels longer than others.
I know. This has definitely felt like a really, really long fortnight. I just want to set this to Do Not Disturb. So, what we're going to talk about today?
So this is a fun one. So Kelly and I were messaging last week to see what's been coming up for us both, and we thought about listening. So, you've heard us both speak about communication, how important it is to speak up for your worth, your value, the programs, the policies, the behaviors that you're looking for in HR, but we haven't really talked a lot about listening, which is frankly just as an important part of communication as speaking. And so we wanted to kind of draw some attention to that side of communication. And I think we thought, Kelly, that it'd be fun just to talk about first what good listening looks like, or what we would say HR pros can start to think about if they learn how to listen better.
Yeah, sure. So it's not me, like I was just doing there, trying to make sure I've got my Do Not Disturb on so that it doesn't beep all the way through. I think for me, good listening is firstly about being present. So being there with that person. And I think we will all have seen situations. And I think in some ways it's kind of even more obvious. Now we're in this virtual world, it's even more obvious if people's eyes are going to the emails that are flashing up, or they're going to their phones, or any of those, those sorts of things. So I think making sure firstly that we can shut out some of those distractions. Like when I'm with you, I'm with you. Yeah. So I'm present, I am fully yours, I'm holding this space for the two of us, or the five of us, or however many of us are in this conversation. It's about holding space, being present, and really just paying attention, really, really paying attention. And that could be, I suppose, if I think of it from a coaching perspective, and actually you do this really well. So it is kind of paraphrasing what I think I've just heard. So actually, let me get this right. I think what you've just said is this, and checking that level of understanding. Because I think where we go wrong in so many situations is I think I've said what I need to say really well, and I think you've heard what I need, what I've just said. So we assume that we're both in agreement, we both understand what needs to happen. And so we both go off and do whatever it is that we've agreed to do, or said what we need to do. But actually then when we come back together, you've gone off and done one thing and I've gone off and done something completely different, because our level of understanding wasn't the same.
Right.
So checking and confirming and clarifying, okay, so we're in agreement that we're going to do X, and we're going to do X by this date and this time, and then we're going to come back and check in with each other. And I think so often we miss that clarifying, we miss that stage. And actually if we're missing all of those stages, so if we're missing being present, and we're missing confirming our understanding, and we're missing confirming kind of what the next steps are, I think that's where we can come up in a lot of issues. And then I suppose if I'm the person speaking, it feels like I have been heard.
Yeah.
So you've not said to me, you and I were just having a quick chat online before, like giving each other the space to say what we need to say, giving each other the space to get off our chests what we need to say. And again, I think sometimes we try to fill that gap too often. It's like, oh God, Laura, yeah, like exactly the same thing happened to me yesterday, and you will not believe this, and you will not believe that. Like, if that's how that conversation is going to go, and sometimes that will happen, right? Communication is two-way. Yeah. But if I've interrupted what you've said before you fully feel that you've been heard, you're leaving that conversation feeling completely unheard, and I'm leaving feeling like I've got everything that I needed to say off my chest. Oh my God, like that was such a release for me.
Yeah.
And so again, I think coming back to that space, coming back to that presenteeism, coming back to that clarification, for me is good listening. Like I want to feel heard.
Yeah.
And I also want to feel that I have given you the space for you to be heard.
Beautifully said.
Thanks. Would you add anything?
Yeah, I think that sometimes people in our community like practical tips. So I'm thinking about being present, and I was thinking about like ways that I do it. So I shut down my email when I'm on a phone call. So like I literally close it out, because if I see one come in and I'm talking to you, I will read it, and then I'm distracted immediately. My cell phone is always turned down when I'm focused. So these are things that we would probably teach like a junior employee on the team with best practices, but I do them as a business owner. Like, people find it funny that my phone's on silent and turned down as if I'm like a micromanaging boss. But that's how I can stay in the lens of I'm listening to you right now. So there's certain ways to be present that literally can keep the distractions at bay, right? So like, can you have music on while you're listening? Maybe, maybe not. You know, can you, like, you have to know your own focus too. I really love what you said about, you know, the assumptions that we make if we don't check and confirm. And I think that's really important. So like, you know, instead of just like having an inner dialogue that's kind of processing what the other person said and then making an assumption that's what happened, you can just say it out loud. Like, exactly. There's no downside to saying, I think I heard this, or I'm confused by X. And maybe in HR, we tend to have, which we've talked about many times, like shame around admitting things we don't know. But this is a great opportunity to say, I don't think I get it, what you just said. I'm going to need you to clarify it. And like, I have no trouble saying that, because I literally need to in order to get clarity. And usually when I create that environment for the other person, they're like, oh, I'm so glad you said something. I'm having trouble explaining it. Okay, great. Now we can get there together, right?
Yeah.
But usually the reason I'm not getting it is because maybe they're having trouble expressing it. And so by listening deeper, we can go farther. I also think that for me, something I've really worked on over the years, and it's probably why I do take notes now, is that I don't want to be so caught up about what I'm going to say next. I want to hear what's happening. So if I have a thought, I want to just, even if it's 2 letters here, to remind myself to come back to it. But I don't want to be waiting for the moment. Like, okay, Allie's talking, but I'm dying to say this one thing, so I'm going to just keep remembering it so I don't forget what it is. And then I don't ever hear what you say. So I recommend, especially in this virtual world, we can take notes and we can use that to remind us, like, oh, I want to come back to this, but stay with the person who's speaking. Hard skill. I think you have to practice that part, not interrupting, not wanting to just say what you want to say.
It is. And I think, again, there are so many different platforms. Like, you know, you and I have both been, you know, looking at things like Clubhouse and these sorts of conversations, and different groups that we've been in, and having lots and lots of different virtual conversations. And it can be so easy, even in face-to-face conversations, you know, like when we're allowed back out into the world again, it can be so easy, can't it, to, okay, Laura's just said that and I immediately want to respond.
Yeah.
The danger of doing that is, if, you know, I cut you off again, you may not necessarily feel heard, because you might have been taking the conversation in one way. And if I interrupt it with my thought, it might then go in a completely different way. So again, you don't feel heard because you constantly feel like you're being interrupted, or you're not able to get out what it is that you want to say.
Right.
And yeah, I think so. I'm not a big note taker, as you know. And again, I think there's is it Stephen Covey quote, like, too often we seek to respond, we don't seek enough to listen.
Yeah, that's a big one.
Actually it there, isn't it? It's, am I really listening to what you're saying, or am I listening just to respond with whatever it is that I've got going on in my head? I think that's a really good one. Just as you were talking.
Yeah, that's a common issue in our space.
It is. So maybe maybe we can explore why on that. I think just before we do, if you don't mind, there was again, just as you were talking there, I had a first coaching conversation with a new client last week, and it was a first kind of deep dive session about who this individual is, really how they can start to pull much more of that out. And they said something about themselves that I then played back to them. They were like, I didn't say that. You must have misheard me. And I was like, okay. So let's clarify. In the context of what you were saying, I heard you say this. And a bit later on, coaching conversation kind of carried on. And then they were like, do you know what? I think I did say that, but it was so unusual because that's something that I do feel about myself, but it's like so deep down that I never really let it out. And so I hadn't realized that I had said it until you said the words. I was like, no, because I would never share that information with anybody. And I don't know where that had come from. And so I think, again, the power of really listening to people is we can pick up on things that other people may not be aware of in a good way and a bad way, but also picking up on those non-verbal cues. And being also able to listen to some of the stuff that's not being said. Again, when we can read between the lines, like you and I know each other well enough by now, I would know if there was something that you weren't saying.
Right.
And I would be confident enough to say, okay, right, so we'll deal with all that stuff. If you've not then said it, okay, right, Laura, it feels like you're holding back. It feels like there's something else you want to say. You know, is there something else that you want to talk about? Is there something else that you were, okay, yes or no? And I think like that's also the power of listening.
Yeah. And I'm hearing you say too, like we need to make space for that type of listening because it's really active, it's really perceptive, it's intuitive, it's curious. And I wonder if we're rushing the listening. So like, I don't know, example in recruiting, right? So people will say to me, you know, I don't know why you take so long in introductory calls with the job seeking community. I'm 15 minutes in and out. I'm like, 15 minutes? I'm at least 45 minutes on any intro call with anyone, which I know is not very commercially sound and whatever. But that's what it takes to listen to a new person who's trying to communicate something to me, either what they need, what they want, what they're looking for, where they need advice. And again, this could lead to coaching, this could lead to a client. I'm not saying I do this multiple times over and over with the same person, but the first call where you're literally getting to know each other, I don't want to rush that. Because to your point, that makes the other person leave the call thinking, wow, 15 minutes, they didn't get to know me at all. They didn't see my, to use your word, my core. They don't know who I am. So for me, it's worth my calendar making room, like literally making space for that. I worry that that's still a strange concept to a lot of people because we're in this productivity, efficiency, epidemic of just like, we don't realize you need time. Like, I mean, I'm constantly telling my clients, like, if I'm working on a new search, we need at least an hour on the intake meeting. We need at least an hour on interview training. They're like, oh, I don't want to do it. I'm like, if you don't put the time in now, it's going to be a much harder process down the road. And in that time, I'm not speaking the whole time. I'm listening.
And I think that's a really key point there. If you invest the time now, it will save you time in the future. And where you mentioned about, the kind of productivity thing that we're in now, I think we are wasting a lot of time. And I'm seeing this kind of twofold. In some cases, we're not booking enough time in the diary for the conversations that really matter. And so you're right, we are rushing the listening because actually we know we've only got 15 minutes or 20 minutes for this conversation. I want to get across what I want to say. You want to get across what you want to say. I'm not really listening to you. You're not really listening to me. Let's just go for it. Okay, cool, done. Right. So we've ticked the box to say, yes, we've had that conversation, but we haven't ticked the box that says, was that a valuable conversation? And I think that's one thing there. Secondly, what I'm then seeing is we are, for a lot of conversations, we're still booking in hour-long slots. And because we know we've got an hour to have that conversation, it may be that the whole conversation may literally only need to be 10, 15 minutes. So we start at the beginning of the conversation with lots of the niceties, how are you? How's the weather? How's home? Which is, again, a good thing to do. That helps us to build relationships. But we then rush through the real reason that we're having the conversation because we then start clock watching. Right. So we rush through all of that, or we don't really get to the point because I don't feel like you're listening to me or you don't feel like I'm listening to you. We skip around the issue. We don't really get to it. And again, we finish that conversation so we can tick the box that says, yes, I've just spent an hour with Laura talking about this thing that we need to be doing. but have we moved it on enough? Has it been a valuable enough conversation? Have we got out of it what we both needed? And if we don't invest that time, I'm totally with you. And again, I think some of this may come from our inbuilt curiosity anyway, the fact that we are both curious. And I think we talked in one of our lives last year, didn't we, about the fact that actually the two of us don't really do that kind of superficial layer. Here's Alice. We love Alice. But like you and I don't work at that superficial level. You and I want to get deep into conversations. If we're talking to a client or anybody, we want to be getting to the real issue. We don't want to be just dealing at this superficial top level, because 9 times out of 10, we know that's not the real problem.
Right.
So sometimes it takes the time to dig and dig and dig and dig to then get to that, okay, what's the issue? How can we really help to give the right solution? But if you only want to spend 10 minutes with us to have that kind of discovery conversation, initial conversation, whatever it is you want to call it, you and I aren't satisfied that we've got to the actual root cause of the problem, because you've just, in 10 minutes, you've reeled off what the issue is. You want us to give you a quick fix. That doesn't work for us, because we know it's got to be superficial to really, really get to the root issue.
They can't problem solve there. And I think this is where, when every HR business partner right now says they want to be strategic, I would argue, like what Kelly and I are talking about right now, this is strategic HR. Is there has to be time to experiment and explore and be curious. Like, it's not all a transactional, like boom, 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 done. There's this blank space. There's this time that has to happen where you're listening and taking notes, or as Kelly would do, record and play back, whatever your methodology is, like listening, coming back to what you heard, writing it out into data, presenting that back to your client. Like, really, that, to me, that is the definition of strategy, is like, it's almost a discovery and uncovery process that I don't know how you can do it without listening, but I think we're trying to skip that part. People just don't realize how important that part is.
Yeah.
And I wonder if it's because we have value on speaking. Like, I was thinking about this before this call. Like, we tell HR pros they need to have the seat at the table, and they have to be so confident, and they have to add value, and, okay. So we say it by, speak your words, like tell your story, right? Storytelling and branding and, how often do we hear this? Don't just present the data, but know how to talk about the data. Okay, so there's lots and lots of trainings about speaking. But so we might have misappropriated all value on speaking and forgotten about actually that there's, you could be on you probably know this more than I do. You could be on a 45-minute coaching call with a client of yours and do very little speaking, but you've added a lot of value.
Yeah, totally. Right? And again, to the point there about the fact that we get taught how to speak, that's one of the reasons, I think a few years ago, I invented an entire workshop called the Listening Leader. And that whole day is about listening. I've been, I started like a month ago, but no, like 22 years ago, I started my corporate journey, and the amount of communication skills training that I would go on, and it was all about presenting. It was all about how to stand. It was all about how to speak. It was about how to project. It was about how to tell your story. Right. There was very little in that about how to get people to really hear what you're saying, or how to get people to really pay attention to what you're saying. It was all one-sided.
Yeah.
And I get, so it's all about talking. I think, even I look at my young nieces now, and I did the same when my sons were younger. We're losing you. There she is.
I know, it was blurry for a second. I don't know why.
But we, with my nieces, even when my sons were little, like from a very, very young age, we give all of this applause and, congratulations and everything when kids first start to speak. Yeah. Oh, they said their first words, did this, did this, did this, did this. And then we spend like most of the rest of their childhood moaning about the fact that our kids do not know how to listen.
Right.
And then we take that into the workplace. Yeah, and we take it to the workplace.
Yeah, these are things that we're probably conditioned into in so many roles. So it's a great point. This is like years of unlearning that have to happen. But I think for anyone in HR who feels like their worth is tied to presenting and storytelling and having that executive presence at the boardroom by sharing, sure, that's a big part of your job. But I guess what we're trying to argue is that so is listening and asking really good questions and waiting for answers and letting other people in the room tell the story so that we can better help them solve those problems.
Yeah. And I genuinely believe I genuinely believe we will never feel truly heard unless we are prepared to listen to somebody else.
Yeah.
Because again, if I use you and I as an example, if I am never listening to you, always interrupting, always making it about me, always flipping the conversation around, never giving you the space, all of those sorts of things. If I am never listening to you, the likelihood, of whether that's subconsciously or consciously, but the likelihood of you then giving me the time to listen to me and allow me to feel fully heard, I think is limited.
Yeah.
So I think if we want to be heard as individuals, I do think we need to ask the question about whether we are truly listening to others. Because for me, there is that level of mutual respect, mutual understanding, building that relationship, developing that trust. And I do think it's two-way. If I'm never listening, I don't think I can ever expect to be heard.
Yeah. And that's strategic partnership in action. I mean, that's like literally how it's done. It's not just a buzzword then.
Yeah.
And you have to know your own limitations. I'm not suggesting that I'm a perfect listener. For example, on Clubhouse, I find it very hard if I'm on a panel of 5 or 6 people, which is why I've realized it's not really the right format for me. I either need to host the room alone or I need one other person because it's impossible. First of all, there's no visual, and I'm such a visual learner. So now I'm like, I did take my notebook last time, but I'm still like, I'm listening. I definitely have something I want to say, but now I've got to wait and I've got to look and see when I can go. And then there's a lot of pontificating and a lot of egos trying to get their word in. And then, of course, my ego creeps up of like, I have something smart to say. And I just realized it's not probably the right forum for me to be on a panel with 7 people, which is fine because it's just not where my listening strengths are going to happen. And to your point, I'm better with one-on-one listening as it is. Because it's hard to get in a deep dive when there's 20 people in a situation. So, in other words, know what works for you and where you can best succeed at this. But you've got to be at least self-aware enough to notice it.
Yeah, totally. And it comes back. So I think sometimes we in effect we are saying the same thing every week, aren't we? It's the self-awareness, it's the developing, it's the understanding, it's understanding who we are so that we can then be better people within our organization. I think ultimately that's probably what we say under lots and lots of different guises every time we have a conversation.
Exactly. And listening is a skill and it's an art and you can practice different ways to do it. Like sometimes if I'm working with a client who's not a very good listener and they're always in a rush and they can't focus long enough for a deep dive, sometimes I'll send them some questions via email and have them fill it out so that the next call I can use that data to say, okay, you had mentioned this. So technically, did they share it with me on a call? No, they shared it with me on their free time, but then I can pull that back in. So like it's playing and being creative, I think, with ways that each other like to communicate.
Yeah. And again, recognizing there is no one size fits all. There is never a one size fits all. And you mentioned with the Clubhouse room, actually, you are a visual, you're more of a visual learner. You're more of a visual communicator. So again, not being able to see that in a Clubhouse room may be very, very different for you. Whereas actually, if you are more of an auditory learner, then you will pick up things very, very differently. If you're more kinesthetic, then again, you want to see what's happening rather than necessarily listening to it in the moment. And we will all have different learning styles, different approaches, preferred ways of doing things. We will all have, different things that we're dealing with. Actually, are we constantly clock watching? And maybe sometimes just like, I'm really sorry if I don't, if I'm not fully present. I'm really worried about a meeting that I've got in 25 minutes. Well, okay, so is now a good time for us to have this conversation?
Right.
Actually, no, probably not. No, because I need some headspace to prepare. Okay, so let's move the conversation.
Yeah.
We don't have to again be I have to speak to you today to tick that thing off that box. If I can't be present,
right,
and we're not going to get the value out of it, maybe today is just not right for that conversation. Maybe we do need to do it a different way. Maybe if you are more visual, how can we make it more visual for you so that you can listen fully and again, you can be heard?
Yeah.
We've got to be looking at all of these different ways to do it. And again, the digital world that we're in at the minute is definitely adding to some of that. And you and I are both hearing people that are Zoom fatigue, because from first thing in the morning until last thing at night is video call. If it's a one-on-one conversation, it could be a WhatsApp call, it could be a phone call, it could be an email, it could be a text. You know, what's going to work for the two of us today? I mean, you and I were talking even, when was it? Some point over the weekend. So you on WhatsApp, you love sending the like the audio messages via WhatsApp. I don't like I don't mind listening to them, but actually I don't like recording them. So you send me the kind of vocal voice messages and I type back because actually that's my preference. But you'd said to me, I love these voice notes. I don't. We worked around it in our own way so that, again, I could say what I needed to say, you could say what you needed to say.
Exactly. And if you hated listening to that, you would just say to me, I don't like recording them and I don't like listening to them. But the fact that you were like, enjoy them. I'm happy to listen to you. I'm just going to type you. I was like, oh, this is fun. Yeah, exactly. Like it's fun that I get to do what I enjoy. You don't mind receiving it that way and vice versa. It's like, we are a good example of that, of trying to figure out different ways that we enjoy communication, receiving the communication, giving the communication. And I guess that's exactly right. Really listening for the listening part. I know you wanted to ask me about the HRTA crisis, I will call it right now.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So for those who are living under a rock, perhaps you haven't noticed, there is a lot happening in HR right now. Intertension. There is tension between groups, and I don't know that I've ever seen it quite this bad. So, you know, you'll see it between total rewards and HRBPs. You'll see it between learning and development and recruiting. There is ego. And again, we need another 20 hours to even dissect what that's about. But there's something rising where everyone wants to feel that they are important and valued, which of course, right? We need that. But there's this disconnect now where the groups are having trouble communicating with each other.
Yeah.
So the last few clubhouse rooms I've had, either that I've been a guest in or that I've hosted, there's been a phrase that's repeatedly come up where either an HRBP or a TA leader will say, I think we're speaking different languages. We're not speaking the same language. I've heard the phrase so many times that I have been staring at it, trying to understand it. Speaking different languages. I don't understand it because I genuinely feel like I take pride in wanting to speak in a way that reaches the other party and vice versa. But I'm really trying to recognize that that's not true for a lot of people right now. And I'm wondering if it's because they're not listening properly. But I don't know if you've heard this phrase, like, oh, we're not even speaking the same language.
Yeah.
I don't know what they're getting at there.
Well, again, for me, that comes from this feeling of not feeling heard.
Yeah.
So I'm only going to say to you, we're speaking different languages if I don't feel that you're getting what I'm trying to say.
Okay.
So if I don't feel like you're getting what I'm trying to say, but I keep saying it exactly the same way, right? I'm digging my heels in and I just keep repeating the same thing over and over and over and over again. And you sit there with like this glazed look over your eye thinking, I have no idea what Kelly is talking about. Right. I'm not picking up on the fact that you've gone glazed. I just keep repeating it.
Okay.
You tell me that you don't understand it, or you give me, again, you play back what you think I've just heard. And I'm like, that is not what I said at all. So, of course, then we get frustrated. So I dig my heels in and just keep repeating it. You keep telling me you don't understand it. And so it's kind of like the best way to end that conversation is just be, you know, we're speaking different languages, or that, you know, we'll just have to agree to disagree.
Yeah.
So we close the conversation. Again, none of us have moved forward. But I think where some of the problem is, I don't think, and again, you and I have had some conversations about this offline, I don't think we're speaking different languages. I just think we are not speaking in a way that understands the point of view of the other person.
And how about we replace speaking with listening? I don't think we're listening in a way that hears the other. Exactly.
Totally.
I think that's right. It's funny because a few times in the rooms, people have said, so who do we think recruiting should report into? Not HR. They should report directly to the CEO and bypass HR. So of course, it's like throwing fuel on the fire. I always ask why. And lo and behold, it's because HR doesn't get recruiting. HR doesn't understand what recruiting does. HR doesn't value it. And I'm like, so the solution is to bypass it altogether? The solution is just to ignore that? I would say the issue is then to get the two parties in the room and literally like mediate that discussion.
Yeah.
And yeah, I feel really passionately about this, that all areas of HR have immense value. I know you believe this as well. And that this inner fighting that we're seeing is just a lack of curiosity and a lack of listening to each other. And I brought this up actually on Twitter. I should have screenshotted it for us, but this woman made a great point that maybe we need more shadowing in HR. So if you work in recruiting, you sit with your HR VP for a half a day or vice versa, and actually learn what they do and know what their challenges are. And again, are we too busy to actively listen, to actively pay attention? Because that's an important use of your time.
Yeah, and I is that understanding. Shadowing would absolutely be a big thing. You mentioned ego earlier. I think that sometimes comes into it, and you know, let's you know, being totally honest, this isn't purely in amongst all of the people functions. This is happening whether it's HR and communications, HR and finance, HR and customer service, HR and operations, you know, all of those different things. And I think again, for me to start off with, I have, you know, I was an HRD managing HR function. I had OD, I had L&D, I had operations, I had HRIS in terms of the systems, and I had the recruitment side of that. And I think sometimes, again, where some of this frustration can come from, when we are working in a specialism, so when we're working in that specialism, our focus is on that specialism. So if I am in recruitment, my job is to recruit whatever, you know, wherever that handoff is, whether I go right through to the onboarding process, whether I am just arranging people for interviews or whatever, that sort of stuff. My role is recruiting. If my role is in customer service, my role is in customer service. When we look at HR really are responsible for 10,000 different things across every single person across the organization, really being pulled from pillar to post with every different side of, you know, different directives, you know, different directorates, different teams, all of those sorts of things. It can be really frustrating if you in recruitment are waiting for a decision from somebody in HR, or you're waiting for some kind of communication within HR. If HR do not see that as the priority for them in that moment, HR will then start to get frustrated. Now, the HR BP, whoever it is that your HR contact is, could be dealing with somebody, could be dealing with a really serious mental health issue, could be dealing with a really serious safeguarding issue, could be dealing with a really serious performance issue, could be dealing with something that's going to have a dramatic impact on the reputational risk of the organization, could be dealing with a huge legal issue. But within the recruitment space, if all I'm thinking, you would never ever come back to me and I'm waiting for this and I'm waiting for this and I'm waiting for this. Now, we're never going to get that full understanding necessarily. We have to listen. Unless you are in the, and you know, I'm not saying HR are special. There are lots of other departments where this happens in. We do have to develop that. I think, again, you and I spoke, it might have been beginning of this year or even just before Christmas. if we all look at it like we have the same goal, our goal is to look after the people within the organisation, support them, grow them, develop them, and at the same time increase the reputation and brand of our organisation, right? Ultimately, that's what we're here for.
Yeah.
So whether you are recruiting, disciplining, performance managing, dealing with well-being, looking at data or systems or learning and development or any of those sorts of things, ultimately we all have the same goal. And I think that's the biggest thing that's missing across all of the different elements of the people function. We're all trying to come at it from our unique silos and from our unique specialism, rather than first of all saying we're all on the same page.
Yeah.
Because if that were our starting point, I think we would then be more prepared and open to understanding and listening, instead of them passing the blame. Because I think then we've got to look at, if we are infighting amongst our own functions, what does that say to the leaders or to the people across the organisation? Well, actually, we don't get on with one another. I'm gonna sit here and I'm gonna blame the TA team. I'm gonna blame the L&D team. I'm gonna blame the OD team. I'm gonna blame the HR team. If we've got that infighting, we're ruining our own reputation in the first place.
Yeah.
The rest of the business will then start to play that game as well. Oh, well, TA do this, HR do this, L&D do this. So the rest of the business get in on that. And we then carry on with it. Oh, well, if they're going to sit and slag Laura off today, oh, well, let me tell you what Laura did yesterday. Let me tell you what Laura did this morning. And let me tell you what Laura didn't do last week. But we're doing nothing for ourselves.
Yeah.
If you then know that I've been slagging you off to everybody that's going to listen, the next time you and I sit down for a conversation, you're already in defensive mode, because I've been slagging you off for the last 3 months to every manager that will listen. You're already in defense mode.
Yeah.
That is not a good way to start any kind of communication or relationship building. Yeah. No way at all.
Yeah, it's really, really interesting what you're saying, because everyone would agree that they love the idea of a shared goal. Like if we asked 100 HR people, they'd be like, of course, yes, shared mission, shared values, shared goal. But then if we ask them how often they use like the word we versus they. So like your recruiting team is working with you. Do you say we have more resumes coming our way? Or do you say they have more resumes coming my way? Or if it's HRIS, do you say they're working on a new implementation, or do you say we are working on a new implementation? It's a subtle difference, but I am consistently telling my clients and candidates that once we start a process, it's a we, and I will literally, it sounds ridiculous, but I will catch them and correct it consistently, because I think the more we get in the pattern of we, it takes that blame and shame away. You can't blame me for something because we're on the same team, right? And it removes some of the judgment. The other thing I would say is we're human beings. We're going to have judgment if, Bob over in accounting is slow at XYZ and not giving us what we need, right? That's a normal judgment to feel like Bob is not doing what I need him to do. Instead of just sitting and complaining, gossiping, and blaming him, why not go over to Bob and actively listen to explore what's going on, right? To say, hey, I'm a little disappointed this is taking so long. Can you talk me through what's been going on over here? I'm just curious what the process has been like. My best hiring managers will ask me, Laura, what do you think the challenges are going to be of this search? What kind of like roadblocks are we going to face? What sort of challenges should we expect? I know it's not going to be an easy ride at every step. So can you let me know where you're struggling, where we're struggling, so that we can anticipate ways to fix it? Not just, wow, it's been 48 hours. Where are those resumes? Recruiting is slow. So it's a subtle shift to, we're sharing. You can say all day long, you share goals, you share vision, you share mission, but I would really look at, is that infighting coming because you're not speaking as a team, listening as a team? It's a huge shift. And frankly, it's not very natural for HR, because you're right, we've been in silos for many, many years.
Yep.
You had mentioned to me, I didn't want to forget to bring it up, that this also could be coming from executives, and it could be kind of fear-based, that listening isn't practiced at all levels. So do you want to share with us what's been on your mind with that?
Yeah, so again, I suppose similarly to what you're seeing between kind of HR and TA, I think, again, when I speak to particularly a lot of senior the most senior people person in the organization. So whether that's HR director, whether that's VP of people, CHRO, CPO, whatever it is, there seems to be, again, this disconnect that comes from the top. That is, HR are not feeling heard. And that could be that they keep being bumped from all of the board meetings. That could be maybe they haven't even got that seat at the top table within the organization and they're reporting into somebody else.
Yeah.
Again, I think coming back to your point about the HR and TA, if it is acceptable behavior for one team to be infighting with another team, what is that saying about the culture of your organization? What type of organization have you got when infighting is acceptable?
Yeah.
What type of example are you setting as a leader when not listening, infighting, ignoring other people, speaking over other people? What type of culture are you creating within your organization? And for me, I suppose it is at what level in your organization is that happening? Are you a CEO that doesn't listen to your C-suite? Are you C-suite that doesn't listen to your directors or your VPs? Are you, director or VP not listening to your heads of department? Where in the organization is that start? Because I do think it has to start somewhere. Again, I think just with what we were saying earlier, that kind of mutual respect thing, and I get, yours and my relationship is what is one-to-one. Ultimately, all of our relationships in our businesses are one-to-one.
Yeah.
All of those relationships are one-to-one. If I do not respect you, you're not going to respect me. If TA does not respect you, you're probably not going to respect them. If HR don't respect me, I'm not going to respect them. So what is our culture saying to allow these things to happen? And do we need to be, well, not do we do need to be demonstrating the importance of time to listen and get curious and understand. And I think that has to come right from the very top. Yeah. It has to come right from the top. We have to be setting an example. We have to be leading by example. And actually, if I'm the, CHRO and I'm responsible for HR and talent, I want to be getting the two of you in a room and say, right, what the hell is going on? Like, we're wasting time. We're damaging our own reputation. We're not listening, we're not understanding, we're not on the same page. We are speaking completely different languages because we've lost sight of our bigger, the one thing that we're all here to achieve together. What the hell is going on? Like, I would want to get the two of you together and anybody else within the organization, rather than just allowing it to continue, because we waste time, we waste energy, we're wasting resource, we're wasting money, the more that we allow all of these things to happen. And I just think I want to question the senior leaders within organizations, because they must know that this is happening. And if they don't know this is happening, they need to be listening to what's going on within their own organization and drawing a line to it. So where is it starting? What do we do to fix it? How do we fix it?
Yeah, I love that. It's a really interesting point, because I think it's hard for people perhaps to face the elephants in a room, to actually address an issue. For me, it's the only way to communicate well. It's like, if there is tension between Bob and Barbara in HR and TA, instead of gossiping, blaming, judging, why not just have, like you said, Bob and Barbara come in a room with another person and talk it through? They will start to speak the same language. They will have the mutual respect you're talking about. And there is power in that one-on-one communication, and I'm so glad you brought that up. I was talking to a hiring manager the other day and asking a few questions about a search, and she said, I haven't spoken directly to the hiring manager yet on her team. And I thought, wow, how interesting. So you've been kind of recruiting for a role, but you haven't really talked to the person in charge. She was like, well, it's kind of in a team email thing going around. And I said, it doesn't matter. Like, if there are 5 people on a hiring team and you're the recruiter in-house, you need to talk to each of those people individually. And then, of course, you can do a group meeting. But you have to build that respect and trust. Because to your point, I think Brene Brown always says it's hard to dislike people up close, you know? So if you actually know your TA partner, then when Barbara's, you know, bitching about her in a team meeting, you could be like, no, that wasn't my experience, but if that's yours, maybe you should have a one-on-one conversation with her and talk it out. You're sort of more willing to defend each other and support each other when there's trust. So I think you're right. And the idea that these screens are blocking that is BS, because it's actually easier now just to be like, I can do a Zoom with you from the UK to the US in 5 minutes. I also am wondering what you said about like the hierarchy of leadership. It's so great, because I know in the last like 5 to 10 years, we saw a big push in New York towards flatter organizations where titles didn't matter. And I really loved that, because it kind of removed that like, oh, I'm a VP and I don't let managers come in my meeting.
Yeah.
Like, that's the part of the problem. Your manager might be the best listener on your team, but if you're not including them, they bring no insight. You know, I was always lucky that even in some of the crazier environments I worked on in my career, I was known by leadership as being a really perceptive listener. So I was brought into leadership meetings with like, what's your insight? Because they knew I was very aware of what was going on.
Yeah.
That needs to be happening in companies all the time. You know, your 23-year-old associate might actually be the wisest one around if they're really perceptive to human behavior and emotion. And so, yeah, this is such an interesting discussion, because I think we're focusing so much on the talking and the speaking and really forgetting about the listening, the observation.
Yeah.
Like you said, between the lines.
Yeah, and having those conversations, again, something that's just, so I'm going way back. I think I was 21. I'd been given a new trainee. So I had a period of a few years where every kind of new trainee, new kind of management trainee that was coming would come into my team. And I'd had this trainee for a few months, and she and one other member of my team were really, really rubbing each other up the wrong way. And I'd spoken to them both individually, I'd spoken to them together, and they would always come out, right, okay, yes, we'll try, right? They refused. It was one of these, you know, they'd kind of sit there with their arms folded, like, yes, we'll try. Like, wouldn't look at each other, wouldn't do anything. I'm like, we have to move this forwards. We have to move this forwards. And I think it's been going on for a few weeks, and one of them had said something to me, and the other one had then kind of come 10 minutes later and was like, blah, 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 blah. I'm like, right, okay, fine. Took them both into a room. And I said, right, we've got two choices. I can facilitate a conversation whereby we do not leave this room until we've worked out our differences, or I can leave you two to it, and you do not leave this room until you have come to a common understanding about what it is that is the issue and how it is that you're going to work together. So I can facilitate, but I think you're only just going to, you know, the two of you are just going to tell me what it is that you think I want to hear. Right, we're not doing this anymore. I left them at 2.5 hours. They sat in this room. They came out, best of friends, biggest support. I still, to this day, do not know what was said in that room. Have no idea what was said in that room. But whatever it was, it solved it. I gave them the time, I gave them the space, and I gave them the permission to speak to one another, to listen to one another, and they were not leaving until they had come to a way. Because I don't want to be wasting time and energy on this. When I'm in the room with you, you are clearly just telling me what it is that you think I want to hear.
Yeah.
The two of us go and do it together. And I can remember my HRD saying to me at the time, like, that was the worst thing you could have done. Like, they could have ended up killing each other. They could, like, worst thing that you could have. And I was like, but nothing else was working. Nothing else was working.
Actually, it really
would have helped.
Yeah, it's really inspiring, because I love the idea that it's the two of them without HR mediating, because sometimes you're right. Then you're almost like performing for that third party. Like, see what she said? I'm defending myself. But when it's one-on-one, it's intimacy, it's power. It's like, that is where connection is made. And I think we need more of that in HR, and it takes vulnerability. And you're right. We don't know what went on in there. There could have been tears. There could have been yelling. There could have been, rage. It doesn't matter, because it's whatever the process was for them to get to that solution. I think it's brilliant. And I think we have to be less afraid of the emotional journey of that, and more willing just to I mean, look, I can't tell you. So exciting news is, by the way, as you know, I started coaching a new recruiting leader last week who's based in Dubai. So for those who don't know this, last year I started realizing there's a lot of talent acquisition pros who need coaching, and there aren't a lot of people out there helping them. And it's something I love doing, is kind of giving back to the community on what I know. And so, first of all, what I love is that it was her CEO who said to her, you probably are going to need somebody to help you get to the next level. You're very experienced, but I want you to keep growing and learning. So she already came from a place of just total openness to receiving information and listening. And it's just so cool to see. But what I was going to say is, like, sometimes the hardest part, what I'm noticing is going to be a fun exercise with her, is that when she's frustrated, and this is true for almost everyone I know in TA, when they're frustrated with a hiring manager, they can vent about it to me. They can articulate the pain points and the struggles, but they're not always brave enough to go say that to the person, because they think it's going to be insulting or mean, or maybe it sounds harsh. And a lot of what I work on with her is just, or already, we've only had one session, is just like, what would it look like if you went in there and just said, I think this is where we are struggling. I think this is where we are getting in our own way. Like, where could we address it? Because if we don't address it, they're not going to be willing to fix it. And she actually said to me, oh, that's strategic partnership, isn't it? I'm like, exactly. Versus just being pissed at them, but then not doing anything with that information, right? So it's really fun to see. I am so proud of just so many people in our community wanting to learn these skills and and you learn them for yourself in your own time. So I know you'd be happy with that little happy.
Yeah, and again, I think I love that one, and I'm glad that you shared it. Thank you. And I think, again, that investment, like we've spoken about this so many times before, but I think for, again, those of us that are in, and I'm going to say people roles full stop, I think whether this is leadership, management, HR, TA, in any of these roles, I think we automatically assume that because we are in that role, we must already have the skills in order to be able to do it. Like, I don't need to learn to listen because I already listen. I don't need to learn to have these types of conversations with people because I already do it. There's a difference between knowing how to do it, the kind of theoretical side of this is, you and I have spoken before, lots of stuff about active listening and all those sorts of things. There's the theoretical side of this is active listening. There is the theoretical side of this is how to have a coaching conversation. There is the theoretical side of this is how to have a conversation that may make you feel uncomfortable. And then there is the reality and the practical side of taking that theory and actually making it happen.
Yeah.
And I think, again, in all kind of people facing roles, sometimes that's the gap. We may know it, we're not doing it. And if we were doing it, we wouldn't have half of these challenges. And again, for me, a lot of this starts with the listening. Again, you and I are naturally curious. We will naturally ask questions. We will naturally listen. We want to hear what people are going to say. Again, we want to go to that deep level, not that superficial. We make time for that because we recognize that it's important. Not everybody does.
Yeah. I know, we take it for granted. I love this idea of going from theory to practice. And I hope anyone who's listening really considers that. Like, I think when you notice yourself judging, blaming, gossiping, like, that's actually a good indication that there's a conversation you need to have with someone.
Yeah,
like,
totally.
That's probably a good data point of like, aha, sounds like you need to go talk to Bob next week. Like, because again, we're human. I'm not suggesting we're not going to have those thoughts. I mean, you and I have certainly had talks offline about frustrating clients and frustrating situations, but then we go and take action and report back on how that action went. But you're right that there's probably a disconnect for someone. They're complaining about it. And then what are they actually doing to make it better? But if we want to be strategic and we want to add value and we want to be seen as a real business partner, that's what consultants do. My friend Amy Miller always says good consulting does not look like good customer service. It's not the same thing. Sometimes you're having like a pretty tough combo. Yeah.
And again, we need to have that depth of conversation, don't we? I think for every, I speak to people, what's the best kind of leader that you've worked with? Who would you say is your best CEO? Who do you think is your best boss? Who do you, who's been the best person that you've worked with? again, whilst we might use different descriptors and there might be slightly different words, actually the underlying thing is somebody that's honest with me, somebody that challenged me and kind of told me what it was, somebody that listened, and somebody that helped me grow. Like that's pretty much all of the underlying stuff that we speak about when we speak about best leaders. If you know, even with some of the conversations that you and I have had, you know, outside of this and as friends, like if we are always doing the kind of nicey, softly, you know, or you know, this is love, like that's not going to be really any good for both of us. Like we'll both challenge one another, we'll both give the good stuff, we'll both give the bad stuff, we'll both, you know, have you tried this, have you thought about, like we'll do that. And we both do that in all of our conversations that we have. We're not just sat, you know, rolling, oh yeah, okay, you know, Laura wants her ego stroking again today, and then me going and talking to somebody else about it. But you and I will have those conversations. We'll say what needs to be said. And again, this comes back to, again, another conversation that we had. We can be both things. We can be supportive and nurturing and loving and kind and developing and growing and listening and all of those sorts of things. And we can give a bit of tough love and a bit of challenge.
Yeah, it's constructive. I love what you said, and we should leave people with this, is like that a really exceptional leader, one that we admire, tends to make us feel heard and want us to grow. And now you're making me realize that they probably go hand in hand. We've been talking so much about growth mindset, needing to be evolving and agile and flexible. And I'm not sure you can grow without listening. And that is important. If you say you're a growing, learning culture, are you listening? I love that.
I like
so
that.
We're going to talk about in 2 weeks' time.
Yeah, we need to have a think. I don't know what we're talking about. Maybe we do. I don't know. Maybe there is something there to explore, or maybe see what other people think. But maybe there is something to explore about this ego.
Yeah. And anyone can feel free to drop ideas in the comments on either of our channels. If there's something you'd love to hear us talk about, we're more than open to your feedback.
We absolutely are. We absolutely will. So you can find Laura Mazzullo on LinkedIn, Learn with Laura, # Learn with Laura on Laura's YouTube channel, and at Eastside Staff on Instagram and Twitter. I think that's everything.
The # is Learn with Laura HR.
Learn with Laura HR. There we go. If you're watching this, you're either watching it probably on my YouTube channel or Laura's. So Kelly Swingler or Learn with Laura HR. And yeah, on LinkedIn, I am Kelly Swingler. On Twitter, I'm Kelly Swingler. And on Instagram, I am at Coaching People Leaders. So yeah, let us know what you want to talk about. If you've got questions from today, let us know. We've been having some great feedback from all of our previous conversations, and lots of people sharing what they're getting from it, which always makes these see me for more worthwhile. So thank you all for joining and listening and all of that sort of stuff. So perfect.
See you soon.
Take care. Bye-bye. Doesn't want to end.